Hey friends, welcome in. My name is Autumn and today I want to talk about my top disappointing reads of 2024. I had a goal of reading 50 books in 2024, which I ended up hitting. Along the way, I found some books that were a little disappointing, and I want to talk about those with you guys here today. I have a few books that I read completely through, cover to cover, and I just did not enjoy them overall that I'm going to talk to you guys about. I DNF'd some books as well this year. Some of my DNFs are going to be soft DNFs, books I plan to return to. Some of them are going to be hard DNFs where I am not ever going to return to these books. They are just not for me. It is not for me in any way, shape, or form, and that's okay. Some of the books on this list might be some of your favorites, and I understand. I get it. I hurt when I see people talk about books that I love and they talk about them in not a great light. While I might be talking about some of the books that are your favorites, definitely just respect my opinion. I'm just talking about books online, how they hit me, how they don't hit me, and we're just here to have fun. So just keep that in mind if you see any books on here that are some of your favorites. We all have an opinion. We all can respect each other's differences and book tastes and how we feel. We're just gonna move forward. So the first book I want to talk to you guys about, which was a disappointing read for me, was Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. So this book, the reason I did not like it is because it was not what I was expecting. And it could have just been a personal thing. I could have been going into this book with different expectations, which was what I think happened. So the person who bought me this book for Christmas last year bought this book for me because they thought that it sounded very similar to Simone St. James, her book, which is The Sundown Motel. I loved that book. That book will forever and always be a 5-star read for me. When you read the back of this book, I honestly kind of thought that it would be similar to that book, and that was just definitely not the case. This book has one of my least favorite tropes. I think that was the huge reason why I just did not like it. I found this book very gross and very disturbing, very not what I was expecting. I did finish it and I think I gave it a 2-star, but thinking back on it, I would probably give it like a 1.5 star because it's just not for me. I do still have this book on my shelf because it was a gift. I might eventually end up unhauling it, but I just did not like it. I didn't really care for the writing style in this too. It felt very strange to me. The main character's mother, we followed her for the majority of this book, and she was just somebody I could not connect with, and I couldn't figure out if that was just a me problem or if it was how she was written. But I thought that she was very odd, different. I don't know. That's kind of how I felt with the storytelling, is it was just different. I am so sad about this book because I love this author. So you can imagine with this book being on my most disappointing books of 2024, how hard this must be for me too. But it's Gallant by V.E. Schwab. I have read 3 books, including this one by this author, and I loved the other 2. I thought they were great. The main reasons why I love V.E. Schwab is her storytelling, how she writes her stories. Her writing craft is just phenomenal. I love how she crafts her characters. In this story, it was V.E. Schwab's writing that carried this story for me. I felt the characters were very cookie cutter, very bland. I couldn't connect with anybody, and whenever the characters would talk to each other, it felt very strange. It felt like a very odd story. It felt very boxy. I did not care for this story. I thought that this book was not some of her best work, and I did read somewhere, and I can't remember where I found this, for V.E. Schwab writing this story, it was a lot more slow going than some of her other projects. Like, she had to really be patient with this story, had to really kind of stretch and like reach deep for the content in this story. I feel like that kind of shows because it is a different kind of story from this author. It's not going to stop me from reading this author. It was disappointing because it's not what I was expecting. I think I gave this book 3 stars, so it's not terrible, but it was just more disappointing on my scale of things. But I mean, a 3-star read is still great, but it was not what I was expecting. I was just disappointed in it. The next book on this list is The Ballerinas by Rachel Kapulki Dale. I read this book back in March. It was disappointing. I think I probably went into this book with different expectations. I think I was expecting it to be more dramatic, more drama, more like conniving, clawing at each other type of story and a lot more backstabbing, multiple characters like backstabbing each other and all of that drama. But we didn't really get that with this book, at least not to what I was wanting out of the story. Honestly, don't even remember much about the story because I was very bored. It felt like you had the answer right in front of you the whole time as the reader, but it was like the other characters didn't piece together what was going on or who did what to who and when, and how all of these years had passed, because the story does follow them when the incident happened, which was I think in like the 1980s, and then it follows them again in 2011, all of these years later. And it just to me seemed very obvious who did what to who and when, but the fact that, you know, these characters were supposed to be so close to each other and were supposed to be in a cutthroat environment too, that they didn't see these plot twists coming. I don't know. It was disappointing. It wasn't what I was expecting. I believe I gave this book 2 stars, and I would support that now. I think it's just a 2-star read for me. The next book on this list was a library book, and it was actually a buddy read. This book is Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. This book, I think I went into it with different expectations of the world. I thought this book was going to be more of a high fantasy world, more of like a kings and queens and castles and things like that. For the first 50% of the book, I was like, what kind of world are we in? I'm very confused here. We went out at one point in this story into this obliterated radioactive area, and so I was like, oh, okay, so we're dystopian. Quick Google search could have told me that it was going to be a dystopian, but I feel like the book itself should eventually tell me what kind of world I'm in, and I didn't feel like it was executed very well. But again, of course, I know I can look up genres and see what is what, who is in what world. I also think I am a little bit too old for this story too, so I feel like it hit me a little bit differently, and I think maybe if I had read it when I was in my teens, I probably would have had a lot more fun with it. I do think that this story is a product of its time because it was also written quite some time ago when certain trends in books were popular. I know a lot of people do enjoy this series and enjoy this author's writing. I still plan on reading this author's other series out there. I think it's called Realm Breaker. I think that's the first book. I have the first book in the series. This was not what I was expecting out of this story. I did not really care for the characters. The characters were just very strange to me. I remember not being able to connect with our main character. It felt like we were trying to do like a knockoff Katniss, but it fell flat for me. And then we had the 2 love interests, which were the 2 brothers. I felt like the author was trying to set us up that huge giant plot twist right there at the end, but it just felt predictable and it just felt very messy. And I do know that this author was quite young when she wrote this story too. I try to take that into consideration being a writer myself. I believe I gave this book 2 stars. I have it in a vlog somewhere, so I'll leave it linked down below if you're curious about that reading experience. The last book on this list, my top disappointment of 2024, is A Door in the Dark by Scott Rankin. It was a disaster. I did not enjoy this story, did not like it, did not like the characters, did not like the plot. There were so many plot holes and then plot conveniences that were just swung in there all willy-nilly. Some of the dialogue in here was super strange. I don't know. This was a very weird book. I also don't think I was the target audience for this book. I did talk about this book in a vlog, but I honestly don't even think I scratched the surface on how much I didn't like this book. I did talk about specifics in that video as to certain dialogues or certain things that were happening to the characters that were just odd. I do think that the concept behind the story is pretty cool. It kind of gives me like Harry Potter fanfic. I don't know if that is a thing. I didn't really look into researching this book at all. Whew, this one was a doozy for me. So those are all the books that I read from cover to cover and did not quite enjoy. And honestly, most of it is probably a me thing. It's just my type of the vibes that I like to read. But these other books that I am going to also talk about are my DNFs, and I'll go through them pretty quickly. I don't rate my DNFs. The first book up that I want to talk about is You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Kaylin Bayron. I DNF'd this book about 60 pages in, which is pretty crazy because this is a relatively short book. I think it's less than 300 pages. I was so disappointed that I did not like this book. What I didn't really care for with this book is the writing style and some of the word choices and like the dialogue. It was odd to me, and I just wasn't really vibing with it, which is kind of a bummer because I had this book on a list of 8 horror books I wanted to read in 2024 spooky season. I was upset that I did not end up enjoying this book, but I didn't. It wasn't for me. I do know I wasn't the target audience, and I was just so excited because it's a slasher and like a paranormal fiction. So I was like, ooh, these sound like things that I would enjoy. I think maybe if the characters or maybe the writing style was a little more adult, I think I would have enjoyed it a little bit more. This is a hard DNF. I don't see myself ever trying to give this book another shot. It wasn't for me, unfortunately. This next book that I am going to hold up is a nonfiction. I DNF'd it. It's a soft DNF. I do have plans to return to this book. The reason I had to stop reading this book is because I just really wasn't enjoying the audiobook narrator for this story. I couldn't place what it was with his voice. I just couldn't read or listen to this book, so I'm just going to have to sit down and try again with a physical copy. But it is The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder by David Grann. I really want to read this book, and I'm so upset that I was having such a sad and disappointing time listening to the audiobook narrator. It's just a personal preference. A soft DNF. I do have plans to return to this book. This next one is probably a soft DNF. I do have plans to return to this book. I just don't really know when, because it's so, I don't want to say far along in a series because it's not really a series, but it's dense in a Tolkien kind of way. It's The Children of Huron by J.R.R. Tolkien. I read a little bit of this for my book club with Brie Bonomo. It's called the Autumn Breeze Book Club. We'd love to have you join us over there. Right now we are getting ready to read Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn, and we could not be more excited. So if you want to join our book club to read some Brandy Sandy to kick off the 2025 year, we would love to have you over there. I just DNF'd this book because Brie and I, with our book club in 2024, we had to pause it. And since we had paused book club, I stopped reading this book because it was a little dull and it wasn't really what I wanted to read in that moment, but I still want to read this book, you know? So it's a soft DNF. The next book up is a very soft DNF. I was the problem. It's me. I was the problem with this book. At the time I sat down to read this book, I was not wanting a historical fiction. I didn't want to read a historical fiction. There was a lot more like historical context in this book that I was expecting, and I just did not want to read it. At that particular moment, I read maybe about 10% of it, and I was just like, I don't want to read this right now. But it is The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. I am really sad that I had to DNF this book, but I had a lot going on. It just was not what I wanted, what I needed, what I should have been reading at that particular moment, so I DNF'd it softly to return to it later. And the last book I soft DNF'd that I have plans to return to, and I am just so sad that it's taken me this long to read this book and to read it from cover to cover, because I was about 30% of the way through when I DNF'd it, but it is Wild and Wicked Things by Francesca May. Around the same time as The 10,000 Doors of January, I had to DNF this book. It was about the same time in my life when I stopped reading both of these two books, and it was nothing to do with either of these two books. It was not the right time for me to read these books. But I know that what I had read of this book, the 30% of it, I loved it. I was really having a lot of fun. I was really enjoying it. But in order to give this book justice, I had to stop reading it at that point in my life. So I have two more books for you guys that I hard DNF'd. Will not be returning to these books at all. But the first one I'm talking about is Looking Glass Sound by Catriona Ward. I didn't like the writing style of this book. It was very confusing, and I looked at some of the reviews for this book, and that is the point of that story, but that's not what I like to read. I was just bored. Things just didn't make sense. I was so confused. I was all of those things, but I didn't care about the characters. And so I ended up DNFing this book. It's a hard DNF. I really can't see myself trying to give this book another shot, but I do plan on giving this author another chance. And the last book on this list is The Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lynn Tan. Nobody is more disappointed in this DNF than I am. I had read maybe about 30%. I read a good chunk of this book and was loving it. I was like, this is a 5-star read. This is the best book. I absolutely cannot eat this book up enough, and I loved the first part of this book. I truly am just so disappointed in where the book went or how long it took us to kind of get to the meat and potatoes of the story, if that makes any sense. I felt like once we got into Act 2 and we were training with the prince, that whole sequence of events was just boring to me. I didn't care. So who knows? I think that was definitely a me thing too. I ended up DNFing this book, and it was a library book. Those are all of the books that were my most disappointing reads, were the books that I DNF'd in 2024. I'm sorry if any of these books were some of your favorites. favorites, but just respect my opinion, where I stand with these books. I tried to explain the best I could as to why I didn't enjoy these books. That is going to be it for this video. Let me know one book that you read in 2024 that was a little disappointing for you. I will see you in the next one. Bye.